Recording in progress.
The scripture is found in 1 John, the 3rd chapter, and verses 16 to 24. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses help? Little children, let us love, not in word or speech, but in truth and action. And by this we will know that we are from the truth and will reassure our hearts before him whenever our hearts condemn us. For God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. Beloved, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have boldness before God, and we receive from him whatever we ask, because we obey his commandments and do what pleases him. And this is his commandment, that we should believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he has commanded us. All who obey his commandments abide in him, and he abides in them. And by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit that he has given us. May God bless to our understanding, and hence to our daily living, is the message found in this passage. And now I want to um, begin the sermon, which is called Laying Down One's Life for Others. And we all think that we know what love is because the media is dominated by images of young, beautiful men and women, either smartly dressed or nearly undressed, looking happily at one another, or walking down an aisle, either towards the altar, or away from it. Amidst it all are radiant smiles and much joy. Clearly, that is our paramount understanding of love, whether it be bi, same-sex, gender, or interracial, or whatever. In addition to understanding love as a romantic phenomenon, many think of it as the impulse that leads to the joy of friendship. They view love as that which unites differences, such as strangers meeting and enjoying one another's company, and hence desiring to spend time together, which is the essence of friendship, wherein each enjoys the other's character, the other's talents, and the other's skills, and just being with the other. Now, the biblical understanding of love transcends that of romantic love, though it is similar to that of those who lay down their lives for their friends. And thus we read in John 15:13, greater love has no one than this, that humans lay down their lives for their friends. And thus Jesus is the greatest exemplar of love because he laid down his life, not only for his immediate friends, but for the salvation and the well-being of all humans. And because of that act, all who follow him are asked to do likewise, to lay down their lives for their friends. In fact, the writer of 1 John 3:16 clearly states, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. We all assume that the love of a mother for her children implies such an act that is totally unselfish. I vividly recall a traumatic experience I had when I was a child. A woman in our neighborhood went next door to a neighbor's house while her two little children were having their afternoon nap. Her coal and wood stove soon overheated and her house caught fire. Her only concern was to rescue her babies, and she vigorously tried to do so while being restrained by her family and neighbors. I will never forget the piercing sound of her cries as she tried to break away from them to re-enter the burning house. She had no concern whatsoever for her own life, only that of her babies. Her maternal love was very much like the love of Jesus, wholly concerned for others and totally unconcerned about her own safety. Such maternal love pays no attention to what today we call self-care, because the mother was willing to sacrifice her life for that of her children. Lest we equate maternal love with that of natural instinct, a similar type of sacrificial love is seen in the life and actions of true patriots, those who willingly choose to sacrifice their lives for their fellow citizens. The context of warfare, however, comprises the difference, because the patriot, as warrior, is trained in the act of violence that is aimed at killing the enemy rather than loving or the enemy or being reconciled to them. Officers who are killed in action are often honored with a military burial where the flag draped coffin is carried by a guard of honor in military dress. The firing of volleys shoots as a salute, and a bugle playing the taps, the flag being folded and presented to the chief mourner. Fairly patriotic love is not what the Epistle of John is advocating. Now, the life and death of a martyr is the closest analogy to the admonition to lay down one's life for one's friend. Martyrdom is clearly an act of sacrificial love. Mohandas Gandhi, the first to practice the method of nonviolent resistance in his successful anti-colonial campaign for the independence of India, was assassinated on January 30th, 1948, at an interfaith prayer meeting. And even though he was a Hindu, he had a great admiration for the moral life and teaching of Jesus of Nazareth. Martin Luther King Jr. is renowned for his similar use of nonviolent resistance in his many campaigns against racial segregation and discrimination in the southern states and in the nation as a whole. And though he was jailed 19 times, he viewed the philosophy of nonviolent resistance as altogether compatible with the life and teaching of Jesus of Nazareth. And like Jesus, he laid down his life for his friends. Sadly, I vividly recall my family and I at dinner in our Chicago home around 6 p.m. on April the 4th, 1968, when we heard the announcement that he had been assassinated while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, where he had gone to participate in a strike of sanitary workers. And I immediately left my family and went to join a rally at a nearby Black church. And like Jesus, Dr. King laid down his life for his friend, But unlike Jesus, however, the inner cities of America exploded in riotous actions as a result. On March the 24th of 1980, Archbishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador was assassinated as he was celebrating Mass. He had been a strong advocate for the poor and openly opposed the dictator General Carlos Humberto Romero. There was no relation to him. He had openly declared his willingness to die for the poor of El Salvador, and hence he boldly condemned the dictatorial government. Like Jesus, Archbishop Romero laid down his life for his friends. Nelson Mandela, the father of the new South Africa, the new anti-apartheid South Africa, spent 27 years of his life in a crude cell on Robben Island, sleeping most of those years on a cold concrete floor with one blanket and no mattress. Clearly, he was willing to lay down his life for his friends, the racially oppressed citizens of South Africa, blacks, Indians, and so-called colored or mixed race people. Now, it seems to me that those of us who have children would all willingly lay down our lives for them. Whenever we look at the painful scenes of grief-stricken men and women holding the lifeless bodies of their children in Gaza, we know each of them would have willingly exchanged their own lives for those of their children. I remind you once again of our scripture lesson today, which says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters, which means God's family. Surely we humans can be called to no greater task than that of laying down our lives for others, because it goes against every natural instinctive drive or impulse to do that. Humans spend most of their energy trying to nurture and save their own lives. Jesus, on the other hand, calls upon us to lay down our lives for others. Is Jesus calling us to act against our nature, our natural drive towards self-preservation? Clearly, the answer is yes, because the life of the other is more precious than one's own life. And this truth is actualized in the act of laying down our lives for others. What does that really mean to us, to lay down our lives for others? Are we up to it? Can we do it? Is it too much for us? Those are some of the questions for us to think. Yes.
Thank you, Peter. While you're speaking, what I was thinking is that though certainly we're not being told to run out now and you know, do something that would end in our life. But if we look at the life of Jesus, it was everything that he did up to that point that caused him to have to lay down his life. And I think it's the same with Martin Luther King or Gandhi, or the priest that you mentioned. So the cause of them having to lay down the life was actually how they had lived their lives up to that point. Whereas if the example of the mother or other things which are circumstantial, in which you just, you just feel you have to do something. Um, so I think there's a couple of different ways of thinking about it in one's life, but I think the one that strikes me the most is living your life in such a way that you're not lose. And then in some cases, that becomes something that folks who are against whatever you're doing.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. Anyone else? Want to? Please go.
It's hard to imagine um, laying your life down for a stranger, thinking about if that was somebody that I didn't know or didn't know anything about, or wasn't part of my family, or just that I would sacrifice my life to save that person. I think that's a hard concept to think about. I I know that when my daughter was sick with cancer, that I kept talking with God, please let her live. And she was so young and had children, and I was older and had seen my grandchildren and had lived a great life. I'd gladly give my life for her to be able to live. And it didn't happen that way. You can bargain with God all you want, and you can pray that it'll happen, but a lot of times it doesn't happen that way. But I was thinking about when the children in Gaza, so many terrible things I've seen in the past 3 months of the horrors over there. And I think if I was in that position and saw a child being hurt, that I would be willing to do that for a child. I don't think I could sit by and allow somebody to hurt a child and not want to come and help that person. But it's still a difficult thing when you think about, if you see somebody drowning and you think, well, I'm not a really good swimmer, so I just better sit back and hope that somebody else swims better than I can help that person. I'm a coward in that way. I probably would feel that way.
Thanks, Judy, for sharing those things. It does make us ponder what Jesus, what the scriptures have in mind when they ask of us to do this. And, and thought of Jesus as being the exemplar of one who laid down his life for the lives of others whom we didn't know. Could not possibly have been. Yes, Judy wants to add something there.
That just reminds me of Peter. And we've been hearing
Yes.
these stories about Peter for the last month, really.
Yes,
And just imagining Peter in that place when he denied Christ 3 times and he loved him.
yes.
But I certainly can relate to Peter.
Yes. At least it means to us that love is not something to be taken easily, and as if we understand fully what it means to love the other. Because it's much more complicated than that. What does it mean to live together, to live in a world where we do not know other people, but we know that they are sort of like us. and final analysis. And can we love them as we love ourselves? To such extent that we're willing to give ourselves for them. We know that we can do it under some circumstances. We think we can, but even on those circumstances, it is extremely difficult for us because we're going against nature in many ways. Nature which says we should preserve our lives and do all that we can to nurture our lives for preservation for as long as can be. But to give our lives for others is a very, very precious gift. And I'll be up to it. If we apply and pray for the grace of God to help us under those circumstances. And these circumstances are all the circumstances that we live in. There's people out there who all need somebody. And can that somebody be us sometimes? Yes.
On Zoom, Allison says, my granddaughter and I went to the I've not seen this word before. I am going to pronounce it wrong. Mamertine prison in Rome, where Peter was held before being killed. Very moving to see where he baptized his parents.
Peter and Paul were both martyred for their faith. Even though Peter was also the one who denied Jesus, according to the scriptures as well. Yes.
It is pretty extraordinary to think about not only what Jesus did, well, I mean, the laying down of one's life. I mean, he had to have that clarity of the big picture because his movement at the time was not on the scale of Martin Luther or on the scale of Gandhi. You know, I mean, he had a following, more than 12 people, but to be able to have that insight to know that this change was not just for those people, but for the bigger picture. A lot of trust, right? That he wasn't just doing it for those people in a time when he didn't have social media or communications to realize that it could have that big impact. That's pretty powerful to think about it. Yeah, and I think about what Adrian said as far as the actions that led up to that and the actions. I mean, I think from things I've seen and read that Martin Luther King knew every day could be his last day. But and so he was willing to continue the actions that led to that and not back down. And that's pretty powerful. But I think for us, it's the giving up of things, right? That's the laying down of something. And you can only do it once as far as your life.
Yeah,
but it's done, you know, after you do that. But it's the giving up of your time. I don't want to call that person today. It's going to take too much time, you know, versus I'm going to take the time. Or I don't have time to do this service or that service. It's giving up a part of your life. You know? So that's another way to look at it.
Thank you all for these very good thoughts. And particularly for the idea that love is not a simple thing. It's very, very complicated. And, that we think we have it because we know what it is, but then circumstances cause us to wonder whether our understanding is sufficient of what it is and it requires of us. So God be with you all as you strive to work this out and bring together. And hopefully our life together in the church will add more and more wisdom to this topic as we go through. Because this is what the gospel is all about. It's all about love. Love of God, God's love for us, our love for one another. Those who are in our midst, and those who are beyond our reach. Forget our realities because they are in God's commands. So let us